Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jared McCormick. I'm the acting director and the director of graduate studies here at NYU in the Kevorkian Center. This is the first of the spring continuation of Digital FORAYS. The event is the first in two parts here: digital data gathering and changing ways of knowing. This event is witnessing proof and human rights. We'll be following up in the chat shortly with more information about the Digital FORAYS series this semester, as well as another series we're running here, Global Uprising. Additionally, an open call for junior scholars, independent scholars who are working in digital outputs or process for a lightning talk in April. So I'm going to try to keep this short. I think everybody has seen the description of the event, but I wanted to start actually with just a little bit of a provocation of something that has come across my desk in the last week. On the right is a picture of Nasser that I just got online. And on the left, I've uploaded it to MyHeritage, a website that is asking people to sign up to network, to do DNA tests. And this is just a forward-facing gimmick for them, where they're calling it deep nostalgia, where they are actually kind of taking your still images and making them move. Some might think it's quite creepy, others find it fascinating. I'm offering that here as it relates and it doesn't. In a day, in this day of how do we know what we know? What does it mean to witness? I think as Hadi, who will be joining us shortly, has even talked about from YouTube, what does it mean that YouTube is pulling down tens of thousands of videos from Syria as we try to remember what the war is and what those documents are actually doing. So the way this is going to go is we have three speakers who each have 10 minutes to put something on the table. That will be half an hour. Following that, we'll have the discussant who will lead us, ask more questions. That will be half an hour. And then we get to the final half hour, 20 minutes for Q&A. Everybody's muted, but we welcome your questions. We can unmute you. You can raise your hand in that final portion. And we encourage you to use the chat function throughout the entire event to put in thoughts, references, however you want to engage everybody that's here. We're recording the event. It will be up on the Kevorkian YouTube page shortly. And that's also just letting you know that the event is being recorded. So I'm going to kind of fall back and say that everybody's full bio is on the website. But let me just give a quick introduction. Samira Kujuk is a researcher, worked in many human rights projects. She's joining us from Lebanon. She'll be presenting first. After that, we're going to go to Lorenzo Pisani. He's an architect and researcher at the Center for Research Architecture at Goldsmith. He's been involved with forensic architecture, forensic oceanography, many other projects. Third will be Hadi Al-Khatib. He is a founder and he's worked with the Syrian Archive as well as other similar projects like the Yemen Archive and others. And finally, the discussant, Gillian C. York, who is at the Electronic Frontiers Foundation. She's the Director for Informational Freedom of Expression. Everybody here has so much to say about this basket of issues, and I'm really excited to see where the conversation goes. So I will stop there and I will turn it over to Samira for her 10-minute entry point for the conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jared, and everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, to start with, I would like to say that it's such a privilege to to be here today on this platform and carry with me the narratives and the stories of people who allowed me to share what they've been through and what we've documented. Also, I would like to emphasize that today is important for me for two reasons. One, it marks the 7th month of the deadly explosion that hit Lebanon. And up till now, of course, the government has taken no proper action into the investigation, but it's because of people like Hadi and Lorenzo, investigative journalists, forensic architects that are, working tooth and nail just in order to collect data from videos, from photos, through testimonies to really build the puzzle for us to understand what really happened. Um, so this is I'm very much looking forward to the presentations by Lorenzo and Hadi around that matter. I come from a place where most of the work I've done dealt with textual data and databases, um, and it all started uh, because of me feeling all the time that I've grown up in a place where there is silence and there are gaps in our memories and in our history. Lebanon witnessed a civil war that we would say ended through an agreement, but people were expected to just wake up the next day as if nothing happened. I grew up in a place where we were not allowed to ask about the war. Nobody spoke about it. There was silence, silence about everything around us. And this silence created this kind of noise for me, whereby I really wanted to know. So I started searching for places where I could find data or about what happened, since there's no unified history book or any kind of information. And I stumbled upon OMAM, which is a documentation and research center established by and founded by the late Luqman Slim, who today marks a month since his assassination in Lebanon. What Luqman was practically doing, he was trying to handle archival documents related to the Lebanese war. He was using books, newspapers, leaflets, videos, and trying to digitize them alongside narratives and interviews so that you can have a comprehensive understanding of our history. And this is very important. And this is the main reason of why I started doing what I currently do. I've worn several hats throughout the past couple of years. The first would be by working with an organization that aimed to collect testimonies and information about missing people from conflict. My focus has been specifically on Lebanon and Syria. And one of the most important aspects of this work has been that it's people-centered, as in it focuses on, one, the right of the families to participate in the process of justice and accountability. So what we did essentially is, one, we supported civil society in their efforts to process the data they've been collecting. As you know, and of course, Hadi would speak more about that, Syria is the most documented conflict. But at the same time, when it comes to missing persons, there are a lot of organizations that are doing that kind of work. So at the organization I was at, it's the ICMP, International Commission on Missing Persons, we were trying to collect all these data from these organizations in order to have some kind of a consolidated database. And at the same time, safeguard the personal data of the people who is being collected. Alongside collecting these kind of information, we were also doing DNA collection of the families. And this meant that we had to go and meet with every particular family member who have lost or is missing a loved one. And it's very important in this approach, to make sure that people are aware of what you're going to do with the data and with the DNA. They're aware of the whole process itself. And they're also asked about their understanding, or what do they envision justice to look like, what kind of reparations they want. And this brings me to the people-centric approach to collecting information, especially when it comes to testimonies and information about missing individuals. It's important to always maintain the involvement of the families, because people who are missing are not numbers. They are individuals who mean something to someone. I'm a person who have a missing uncle from the Lebanese war. My grandma died not knowing the fate of my uncle, and I feel closely to this particular issue and cause. And that's why I try as much as I can I tried as much as I can in that organization to always make sure that families' voices and narratives are there in the process, even if it's just collecting testimonies and DNA. It's very important to keep updating them on the process of where we are, and make sure that they participate in the design of institutions and what comes next. And I think one of the successes of the work of not necessarily just the ICMP, but a lot of organizations, Syrian organizations, is the Truth and Justice Charter. That is one also of the positive gifts of February 2021, whereby 5 different family groups came together and designed a charter on how do they envision justice and their demands regarding missing individuals. The second hat I wore was after working on the issue of the missing, and that was more on maintaining and analyzing information regarding human rights violations. Also, I have never been a first line responder. I haven't been the person who is taking the video, collecting the information, or documenting. I was the person at the back seat who was receiving all this data from civil society organizations who wanted, one, a safe place to archive all what's being collected. And at the same time, they wanted to make sure that while they are on the field, somebody is taking care of the data, making sure they do the right analysis, figuring out who did what, and validating as well all the data that's being received. And of course, one of the challenges is to make sure that we always localize the analysis of the data, given that in that particular line of work, sometimes you would receive information from organizations that you're not familiar with the context of. So it's always important in such places to have lawyers, advocates, and the people themselves engaged in the process. We've used in both lines of work, we've always made sure that we have protection measures, such as quality assurance of every data set, making sure that it's physical and digitally secured by firewalls, backups, protected servers. And one of the perks of working at both places was that they are treaty-based organizations, which means that all the information that they receive and is being saved cannot be accessed by any third party or cannot be subpoenaed, which was kind of a relief for many people and many organizations we worked with. And regarding the data processing, we always made sure that data was processed for the purpose of which it was collected, and we will always go back and revert to the CSO itself. And as much as we can, of course, make sure that the people who are the subject of these particular information are either giving their consent or participating in the process of analysis itself. So basically, in short, everything I've done has been trying, one, to safeguard information that, or preserve information, textual mostly. And at the same time, the aim of whatever we do is to hold perpetrators accountable. But since I've never been in the position of doing the documentation myself, I cannot speak on the behalf of others and what kind of accountability or justice this data would bring forward. It's always up to to the people, to the CSOs, to decide on that matter. It could be for advocacy, it could be for accountability, it could be for memorialization. It doesn't matter as long as this data is being used for the purpose of why it was collected. And of course, there are a lot of questions that would come up, but I'd rather stop here and leave it to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to Lorenzo.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Jared. And yeah, thanks, Samira. It's great to hear about your work. Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen because I'd like to show you a couple of images. Can you see my screen? Can you see the
Perfect.
image? Yeah. Okay. Great. So yeah, thanks again for having me. What I'd like to do tonight is to, as I said, show you a couple of images that come from some work that I've done in the frame of the forensic oceanography project. So this is something, it's a collaborative project that I started with friends and colleagues in 2011, and through which we have attempted to critically investigate and document the conditions that have led to the death of several thousands or thousands of people, of migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea over the last few years. And I want to do this, I want to show you this couple of images as a way to think through how our own engagement with different forms of border violence and the documentation of that violence has changed over the years, opening up for us a series of questions and dilemmas that concern, broadly speaking, the relation between witnessing, between evidence production, and the emergence of different political subjects. So I'll jump straight into it. So the first image is the one that you can see here. This is a satellite image that's depicting a portion of the Strait of Sicily between the coast of Libya, which is in the lower left corner, and the island of Malta in the upper portion of the image. It was taken in March 2011, at the time when the central Mediterranean arguably could have been described as one of the most surveilled areas in the world. As you might remember, NATO was waging a military campaign against the Libyan regime, in the frame of which it was enforcing a strict arms embargo. And so there were at least 38 ships, military ships, that were monitoring any traffic off the coasts of Libya. What makes this image interesting, I think, is that images such as this one are also routinely used for the policing of illegalized migration. But in the frame of our investigation into what came to be known as the Left to Die boat, we try to repurpose it as evidence of a crime of non-assistance. So this was a story of how 72 passengers who had left Libya in the attempt to reach the coast of Italy were left to drift for 14 days despite repeated contacts with some of the military ships and helicopters that were present in the area. By combining this image with a drift model that you can see, so the plume here, it's a model that was built for us by an oceanographer, and so the yellow area describes where the migrant boat was located at the time when the image was taken. So by combining this satellite image with this drift model, we were able to establish that the bright pixels appearing in the image, and that where you see marked here by these dots, represented large ships that were located in the vicinity of the boat. So all the vessels that were present in the area had been informed of the distress of the passengers as well as their position, and could have easily rescued them, but chose not to intervene, leading to the slow death of 63 people over these 14 days drift. So satellite imagery here is one of the many tools that we have used to offer an alternative reading of these and other similar events. And somehow in the absence of a relevant, revelatory image, right, that could have, proven unequivocally these events, we try to corroborate the survivors' testimonies by mobilizing against the grain the vast apparatus of remote sensing devices, which has transformed the contemporary ocean into a sensorium of sorts, right? And as I said, while these technologies are often used for the purpose of policing illegalized migration, we have used them in this case to reconstruct what happened to this vessel, exercising what we have called a disobedient gaze, i.e., trying to redirect the light shed by the surveillance apparatus away from illegalized migration and back towards the act of policing itself. And as a way to make evident the violence that border policing structurally produces. So, before that, so the reason, I should stress here that, the absence of images concerning this event was not an accident, right? But rather was the outcome of a particular aesthetic regime, right? As Danaile Gebre, one of the survivors that we have met and remained in contact since, and as well as other survivors of this event have told us, several photographs were taken at different moments throughout the drift of the boat, right? Both by the military personnel that sighted the migrants, as well as by the migrants themselves, who used their mobile phones to document these encounters. The images taken by the migrants probably have been destroyed once they were imprisoned upon their drifting back on the Libyan shores, while those taken by the militaries probably still exist, stored on a memory card or a computer hard drive, but have so far remained inaccessible to our investigation. So in this case, in a sense, we had to work. So this image really exemplifies the work that we had to do somehow within and against these conditions of selective visibility that characterized the Mediterranean border at the time, in our attempt somehow to affirm a right to look that could challenge states' monopoly of vision over this area of the world, over the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, right? Now, and moving to the second image, the situation had radically changed a few years later in 2017 when this other image was taken. At the time, the Central Mediterranean, in the Central Mediterranean were operating a number of non-governmental groups that had started to conduct search and rescue operations at sea in response to state authorities' persistent inaction. So many of those organizations were acutely aware of their critical role of witnesses of what was happening in the Mediterranean at the time, where migrants were, and still are to a large extent, systematically intercepted and violently returned to Libya in violation of international law. So one of these groups, Sea-Watch, which is the ship that you see on the horizon there, had transformed its own ship into a veritable audiovisual recording apparatus, right? So they installed at least 6 cameras on its deck and mast and provided its crew with GoPro cameras, right? So in a sense, while our first investigation, we had to deal with the absence of images, this second image here, kind of encapsulates a different kind of problem. So the problem more recently has been rather the excess of, images, right? We're flooded by hours and hours of footage, right? So in order to reconstruct this episode that you see portrayed here, in which the Libyan Coast Guard attacked Sea-Watch in the attempt to capture and abduct a group of migrants as they were being rescued by the non-governmental group, we used 3D modeling as a sort of palimpsest, right? As a kind of scaffolding that allowed us to recompose the various points of view that document the scene, cross-referencing and geolocating all video and other elements and data and metadata that we had collected around this event into a somehow coherent and polyperspectival reconstruction of what had happened, right? So if you look at our video reconstruction of this event, that you can find online, you'll see how the video constantly shifts and moves between these different points of view, right? With the whole scene somehow pivoting around these different and multiple recording points. So while these images have provided us with fundamental evidence, working with them, I think, has also brought up a number of ethical and political questions for us. And it's on those kind of dilemmas that I also like maybe to conclude my, my proposition here, right? So first of all, I think these kind of images forced us to reflect on the very nature of witnessing and truth in the so-called age of post-truth, which is a term which has a lot of problems, I think, but I mean, maybe we can discuss that later. What I want to say here is that what became clear to us, I think, in this context, is that within such media-saturated environments, the multiplication of perspectives, this kind of flooding of images and data, can be also mobilized as a form of obfuscation, right? In which information gets extracted from its context and used to support very spurious claims, such as those, for instance, of various European politicians that at the time had argued that the Libyan Coast Guard was simply conducting a normal and simple, rescue operations, right? So our answer to that has been somehow, an attempt to rethink truth not as a kind of moment of absolute revelation, but rather as a slow, painstaking, and open-ended process of assembling and cross-referencing a multitude of data and often contradicting sources. And what emerges from this process, I think, is perhaps a form of truth that is neither subjective nor objective, but is, could perhaps be defined as collective, right? A truth that is also not afraid of showing the cracks and fissures that mark it, and that is therefore somehow more fragile, but hopefully also because of that, not less powerful, right? And then I wanted to point to a second question, which I think it's equally, if not more important, which is more of a kind of ethical question in the relation with these images. Samira, you were mentioning, of course, the important work of, let's say, keeping contact and involving people who are often the victims of these events into such kind of work of documentation. And in this case, this investigation posed a problem for us in the sense that while in the first investigation, we were starting from survivor's testimony, but then we worked mostly with the kind of, remotely sensed data that I was showing you before. Here, this kind of imagery recorded by search and rescue NGOs really brought us to the heart of the events, right? In an intimate and almost kind of, disturbing proximity with non-white bodies struggling for their lives, right? And many of which we didn't have contact with, some of which we did establish contact afterwards, but many of them we could not, right? Because they were brought back to Libya, or some of them even drowned, right? So I think that despite, the best intentions of their producers and users, such imagery always risks reinforcing tropes of white saviorism, but also somehow reproducing some of the very racialized imaginaries upon which the very kind of exclusionary nature of European and international borders is often predicated, right? So I'm just kind of posing this as an open question, aware that there is no kind of easy solution out of that. But I guess one of the questions that we have been, grappling with, in relation to this project has really been how can these images become part of a progressive kind of change rather than simply recirculating, dehumanizing footage, right? How can these images become part of what has been called militant evidence and be mobilized and made to circulate across wider media ecologies in a way that foster collective action rather than simply kind of repeating this imaginary of viral black and non-white, more generally, death, right? So yeah, I think I'll leave it at there, but that was my contribution.
Great, thank you so much, Lorenzo. And I'm just gonna put a link in the chat, and we're going to pivot to Hadi.
Thank you so much, Jared, for the invitation, and thanks a lot, Samira and Lorenzo, for the presentations. Really great work, and I mean, it's really challenges that I see from Lorenzo's presentation when it comes to like information or images, like in certain situations that we are investigating. So it's really interesting to see that. So I'm gonna also share with you a few videos, and those videos are posted on YouTube. So I'm gonna share them with you. And what I would like to share is a story of a hospital that was established in 2010 in Syria, in a city called Kafr Zeta. And it was serving thousands of people there, and that it was completely destroyed after that just 3 days ago. It's something that we are working on right now, and it's part of a bigger project which is related to investigating attacks against medical facilities in Syria between 2012 and 2020. So I'm gonna share my screen very quickly. And I hope that you can see
Yeah.
something there. Okay, great. So this is the hospital of that was established in a city called Kafr Zeta. It was established in 2010. And this video was published by one of the civilians that were living there. And he published this video on YouTube, and he wanted to show the hospital when it was established in 2010. And then and then he also wanted to show a photo of the hospital after it was attacked, and after it was out of service. So this hospital was really important for the people that were living there. And at that time, this area was not in control of the Syrian government. It was in control of the opposition groups. And it was being targeted by airstrikes or in many different ways. But the people that were living in Kafr Zeta really, and mostly the doctors, really wanted to make sure that they are able to continue their work, and they are able to serve other people medically and do their treatment. Because it's really important for people to have access to definitely like medical situation, even if the whole situation is really very bad, the access to medical is very essential. So what people did there is the following. Sorry, this is the wrong video. So what they have done is they created a hospital that is in a cave. So they went into cave, they digged, and they created a hospital there. This is a video that has been taken also by the same person, and he was documenting how the operation of constructing this hospital inside an actual cave. And they wanted to do this because most of the times when hospitals are attacked, they are most attacked with airstrikes. And we have seen through working on our investigation for 2 years that most of those hospitals are attacked directly with very specified precision. So that definitely needs a precision and needs high targeting of specific buildings. But they thought if they have it inside an actual cave, then they would be definitely safer. And they managed to do this. In the end of the video, this is the doctor that he was responsible for the whole operation. And I think in the end, they kind of show footage of them operating in the hospital, like what you see here. So I would like to share Google Earth. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is the location of the hospital. As you see, it's this is the same area, but we don't notice any activity here. The hospital, they started to work on it in 2015. So just using the historical imagery there and going to 2000, like early 2014, we can see that, you know, operation started to create this hospital. 2015, you can see it's like really clear, you know, roads and, you know, it's being completely built. Google Earth is definitely one of the tools that helped us a lot to verify locations of certain objects that were attacked, to kind of understand and assess the damage before and after the attack, and prove certain images and videos when they are published claiming of certain incidents of human rights violations. But as you see, I mean, it's been built between 2014 and 2017. We can see it very clearly operating. Just going into the first video, which is this one. So this video is from 2018 in January, and it's a video that showed, it's a CCTV camera that was attached in the hospital, inside the hospital itself. You can see how it captured the first moment of targeting this hospital. So if I go back to Google Earth, this is the cave. And if we go out a little bit, you can see it's in like a very remote area. So this is more or less, it's targeted. They acquired the coordinates of this hospital somehow. It's remote. They knew where it was and they targeted it, as you can see in the video here. So this is the first attack, January 2018. Another incident another incident of this hospital that was attacked was in 2000. Was in February, also 2018, again CCTV camera video that shows how the hospital was also targeted. As you can see here. So in 2019, the Syrian government got control of this whole area. Most of the medical doctors that were living there, they definitely fled into the north of Syria, where they are right now. Some of them, they definitely went to Turkey or to Europe. And the hospital has been definitely closed since then. And what happened 3 days ago, and that was in, I think, March 1st, just a few days ago, a video was published by a Russian news agency showing how they went into this hospital, as you can see here. And then they were showing different things inside the video. They were describing that this hospital was a kind of used by terrorists. This is where they used to hide. And this is why it was airstrikes. And then by the end of the video, they show how they plant explosions to destroy the hospital altogether, as you can see right now here. So we don't have access to like very recent satellite imagery to see what happened in the hospital right now. But this is exactly what's happening in Syria right now, as perpetrators have access and control over the territory again. They're destroying all kinds of evidence that show that they have committed human rights violations from the first place. And as you can see right now, the hospital that was established 2015 doesn't exist in reality anymore. And what we are left with is we are left with videos, images that we are working on collecting, archiving, and verifying in order to make sure that it's used to create human rights reporting, to be part and support legal case building against perpetrators of these crimes. And the project that we are working on is going to be published soon, which is about all attacks related to medical facilities between 2012 2020. We wanted to show that these attacks were intentional, they were strategic, and they were systematic. So we laid things in a timeline to make sure that this is understandable, as well as on a map. And we linked every video that we have verified to a certain incident. There are more than 400 incidents and hundreds of hospitals. So I will stop it here because it's already 11 minutes. And
thank you so much, Hadi. I'm going to turn it over to Jillian.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Hadi, Samira, and Lorenzo. I've got like 6 pages of notes here, so I'm gonna do my best to share a few thoughts, and then I guess in terms of procedure, if it's okay with the 3 of you, I would like to just pose some questions to leave you with, and then turn the floor over to you, if that works. So just to start, I was really fascinated with the MyHeritage example with Nasser. I hadn't seen that particular site, but it's been really interesting to watch the past decade I have this very clear memory in my head of this one particular moment just before the uprisings began 10 years ago, which is Al-Ahram in Egypt photoshopping. There was this picture of the quartet, right, the political leaders of the time, and Al-Ahram had photoshopped Mubarak to the front of it. It was such an obvious Photoshop job and really absurd. And obviously, like, the internet quickly turned it over and flipped it on its head. But so, seeing this deep fake now that's much more, I guess, impenetrable for some people. Obviously, this person is deceased, but in a lot of these cases, I think that, we've just reached this real pinnacle of what's possible. And so I'll kind of turn there to react and respond to your really fascinating presentations. And I think just in terms of kind of the themes that I've picked up on, beyond the sort of where we are technologically and what is possible. Obviously, I think the ethics of documentation, but also the complexity of truth. And I was really fascinated, Lorenzo, I'm definitely going to come back to your thoughts on post-truth and where we sit right now, because I think that looking at all of your work, it brings this thing to mind that I've been thinking about a lot over the past year, which is just this, as we become more politically divided and as truth becomes more and more fractured, what feels absolutely imperative and necessary at this moment is this ability to view things with much more complex thinking than we have in the past. And so, I've been kind of pushing back against binary thinking and more towards complex thinking. And I think that fits well with the themes that you raised there in terms of the complexity of truth and this, you didn't use the word fractured, you used collective truth, which I really like, not afraid of cracks and fissures. And I think that that is where we need to be. And then I think the third point, which was less, I guess, a more subtle point, but a theme throughout, is just our reliance on an unsteady, unstable, or corporatized and controlled architecture, which all of these do bring to mind, although, you know, in varying ways. And Hadi, obviously I'm most familiar with your work, and I know the ways in which you have a complex relationship, especially to Google. So I am going to come back to that, but let me go back now and just comment a little bit on each one. And again, I will pose my questions and then return to you to answer them, just to make it easier. So, I mean, Samira, I was really, you know, I think I'm a little familiar with your work and the work of Imam, but I'm really kind of curious about the techniques specifically that are used to ensure that the families that you're engaging with feel safe in this process, but also how that's changed, particularly during the pandemic. I mean, obviously, I know that Lebanon has, you know, face the pandemic a bit differently than like we have here in Berlin, particularly with the explosion. But I'm very curious to understand what the changes have looked like there. And I'll come back for another one as well. Lorenzo, looking through or thinking through the things that you were talking about, I wrote down this phrase, radical reversal. The ways in which technology is used to what you said, like subverting to a disobedient gaze. And I guess just thinking about it reminded me of the internet as architecture and the ways in which we subvert technologies. You talked about surveillance technology, but I think that there are a lot of other examples here. And so I was curious, what are some of the other observations that you've made of other, you know, other examples of this concept or other instances of subversion of technology? And I also wanted to ask you if, of course, I want to come back to the thoughts on post-truth and ask you more about there, but the other thing that really struck me was what you said about selective visibility and, you know, sort of the right to look to challenge the state monopoly that authority has over vision. That really struck me as well as something that, just to bring Lebanon back into the theme, that really struck me at the beginning of the pandemic. One of the first bizarre incidents that I saw happen kind of under, like, without the watchful eyes of the media, when the media was unable to report on a lot of this stuff, was the extradition of, I can't remember his name in this moment, but the extradition of someone from, not extradition, the kind of rescuing of this Lebanese citizen from Lebanon back to the US. And the reason that I heard about this was only because he was from my hometown. And so what he had done, he'd been living in the US for many years. He was extradited to Lebanon, or he went to Lebanon to visit family, was caught because he had obtained Israeli citizenship at some point throughout his history. And then the US swooped in and without any real media attention managed to rescue him. And I wouldn't have heard about this if he hadn't been from my town. And so I guess it just really struck me, this idea of selective visibility, and again, like how, what the nature of witnessing and truth is, not just in the post-truth era, but in an era where the media and journalists are considerably inhibited from doing their jobs because of the inability to enter certain places, to travel, et cetera. And obviously that was an issue before the pandemic, but I'm particularly curious if anyone had thoughts on where that stands now. And then Hadi, I hadn't heard that particular story, and I don't know if anyone saw my face, but the hospital in a cave is incredible, truly incredible. And also incredible just how reliant your work is, and how reliant a lot of this work is on a company that plays a really horrid game of geopolitics. So, you know, I think a lot of you know that I lived in Morocco once upon a time, and Morocco does not allow Google Earth to be used over most of its sites. So Google complies with the desires of the government, and therefore blocks the vast majority of historical sites, government facilities, et cetera, from being seen. And I thought it was just really interesting. I don't know, I mean, I do know a little bit about Syria's history and censoring some of these sites pre-war, but I was really just sort of fascinated by the way in which Google Earth can be used to witness something Whereas you have this more adversarial, and I'm going to push you to talk about it, but this more adversarial role with YouTube and the way in which they've kind of carelessly, I mean, I would say it is carelessly removed a lot of the content. I don't see it necessarily as malicious, although feel free to disagree. But just, you know, having worked with you on this, it feels like this sort of act of geopolitical carelessness and lack of understanding of the importance of using these tools to witness. So I will, leave you to those questions and can go back and forth or go back and forth with each other as we see fit. But thank you all so much.
Thank you. The floor is open for whoever wants to jump in.
I can start if you want. Yes.
Please, Adi, yes.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Gillian. Thank you so much. I mean, this is really great points because, I mean, you are totally right. Like we are in so much reliant on these technologies. To be honest with you, I really don't know how we could have operated, especially when it comes to using the geolocation techniques without Google Earth. Unfortunately, it's something that there is not an easy alternative for. And as you said, I mean, even in Syria, Google Earth is more or less updated more than other countries, such as you said, like Morocco or Iraq. Iraq, last time it was updated was like in early 2000. It really limits our search. We are able to see some areas, we are not able to see other areas. It really depends on the coverage, and it could be also like very much political decisions of what they want to update and what needs to be censored based on governmental requests. Which really, I mean, limits our search. And this is from the point of view of like using one of the products of Google to geolocate and verify imagery, which is really important to make sure that we add value to imagery to be able to then use it. And at the same time, most of the content that were uploaded on social media. In the case of Syria, it was uploaded on YouTube. And Syrians from the beginning, from 2011, the beginning of the uprising and the beginning of the protest, they were documenting everything and publishing everything using YouTube. And they would call it the archive. The YouTube was their archive. And when we ask people, have you archived their materials? They would say, yes, absolutely. We did it using YouTube. All our materials are uploaded on the internet. And until now, this is really the case. But as you mentioned, Gillian, because of the lack of understanding of the Syrian context in terms of like how these social media platforms were really important to kind of reach a very big audience because the Syrians at that point wanted one thing. I mean, when we right now talk to, we talk right now, we are talking a lot to Syrian photographers and video makers, and we ask them this question is like, why did you start this from the beginning? Why did you hold a camera and a mobile phone? Why did you go to the streets? What was your motivation? And they all say the same thing, more or less, even though they are from different backgrounds, different locations in Syria. They all mention we don't want what happened in Hama in the 80s to repeat itself again. Hama in the 80s is where everything was bombed. There was very little documentation. They wanted to make sure that everything is documented, everything is shown to the world, and they use social media to do so. Unfortunately, Google didn't know this, and they took down thousands of videos. which was a very, very difficult for us. And it's going to be very difficult for the transitional justice of the country, very difficult for the current justice cases we are working on, or any future ones. Unfortunately, we are still facing these difficulties. The situation is getting even worse, and even after raising awareness a lot about the issue, we're still having the same conversation in terms of we know that this content is hard and difficult and graphic, and we know that it's violent, but we didn't have any place, and people use social media in order to archive things there and to show the world what's happening in their country. And we are still, unfortunately, stuck in this situation with the social media platforms such as Google. I'll stop it here so I don't talk very much.
Thank you, Hadi. I really appreciate that. But yeah, either of you, if you'd like to.
Okay, I will jump in. Thank you, Hadi, a lot. And I'm at awe at the kind of work that you do. It's very complicated for me, at least. And speaking of Hama, it's one of the issues that come up all the time, or used to come up all the time, when we met with the families and we were recording all the information on their missing relatives. And they would be like, we wish that there was some kind of mechanism through which we can report that, because families have the right to truth and even have the right to be acknowledged for having somebody who's been missing. It's like not reporting a missing person is almost equivalent to erasing the history of the whole family, or that human existed. As regarding to your question, I haven't worked within an institution or an organization with the families, so I cannot answer that directly. But what I can say is that right now I've formed kind of a friendship relation, like friend relation with them, and they're kind of like family. So I know about their stories, but I don't have the consent to share that with you right now. So I cannot, but I can say that the situation in Lebanon is dire, and the economic situation has hit the Syrians as much as the Lebanese, if not worse. So the problem is, you cannot, I mean, I would assume you cannot ask people to become politically active if they are just thinking of just, making sure they have food on the table or they have a shelter. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a snowstorm, and people who are in tented settlements couldn't find a place to go to because of COVID and all these measures. So frankly speaking, there's also some kind of priority right now for the people. It doesn't mean that they forgot about their loved ones, but it means that they need to just make sure they're surviving in order to keep the fight. But I would want to emphasize that I can't, or I couldn't throughout the presentation, talk about some technicalities of the work because of the security and the privacy of my current position, which does not allow me to disclose a lot of information. But I've tried as much as I can to just kind of give a comprehensive idea. And I really wanted to focus on the families, because most of the time when we talk about justice, or recently when we were all celebrating the verdict in Copland, it would be good to take a step back and also see how does it relate to Syrians in Lebanon, to Syrians who are still inside Syria, who cannot even afford to eat or survive given the economic crisis. So it doesn't mean that it's not a celebratory event. It is, for sure. But at the same time, it's always good to see what the people want as well. And I think Hadi in his work, and I know I follow what you do with SCM, you're very true to the cause in a way where you always make sure that you reflect the opinions and the narratives of the people who took the videos or who are in the videos. And this is something that is great and important in the work that you are doing. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Lorenzo?
Yeah, thanks to everyone. It's really, yeah, great conversation, and thanks, Gillian, for your prompts. Yeah, you raised a number of issues, so I'm not sure I will be able to address all of them, but maybe I'd like to start, just very briefly to, highlight something that Hadi was saying earlier. I was struck by, what you were saying about the, the idea of like this kind of relation, a certain relation, let's say, to the past, right? To the idea of like, not anymore. We have seen this happening, in the 80s in Hama, etc. We don't want this to happen in the future, right? And I feel there is a certain kind of, let's say, all of these projects somehow, speak of a certain relation between past and future, which I find quite interesting and very central, and that I don't feel I have the kind of vocabulary to be able to articulate that. But it's also that because there is also kind of commitment to the future, in the sense of saying, oh, we know that maybe some of the things that we are doing now like won't have an immediate impact, but we also know there's a duty, let's say, for let's say 50 years from now, for people to be able to see that it's not that everyone was agreeing with what was happening, right? It's not that we didn't know, right? We need to leave some traces of like different narratives, besides those of like the victors in the case of Syria, or besides those of, let's say, the powerful in the case of migration policies and death at the border, right? So I just wanted to stress that. In terms of like also relation to the past, you were mentioning, Gillian, kind of longer genealogies and traditions of like projects that have used, let's say, a kind of this idea of like reversing the gaze, right? And you were mentioning, of course, the whole tradition also like open source, computing and more kind of DIY, coding, etc. That I think it's also like a very good, kind of reference point for a lot of these projects. And obviously, we shouldn't forget about other genealogies, like, I think yesterday was the 30th anniversary of the Rodney King beating, right? And the Rodney King video. So, I think a lot of these projects also owe a lot to, like many of the discussions that, emerged out and in the wake of those events. You were asking about the question of post-truth and kind of my issues with that. And yeah, that opens up, again, a kind of very broad, question. But I do think it's an important question insofar as, I think many of us, or well, I don't want to, generalize too much, at least myself, let's say, I kind of come from I've been trained somehow to challenge and to question, let's say, received truth and authorities and expert knowledge and these kind of things. And there's, this kind of training, of course, is remains central, but also, maybe it hasn't equipped us with, ways to respond to the current attempt to, somehow, kind of tampering with truth, not so much, through secrecy, not so much by kind of removing information, but rather, as I was saying earlier, by adding, right? And by augmenting the level of noise, right? By multiplying, videos on YouTube, right? By blurring perceptions in a way that it doesn't make possible anymore to know what is real or not, right? So how do we deal with that? And I think for many, or let's say, at least, one of the answer, maybe like one of the most common in the more kind of mainstream, let's say, liberal arena, has been somehow to kind of, try to reinforce, the power of expert knowledge, right? Reinstate the authority of the expert, etc. Go back to somehow a kind of very, masculine and illuministic, let's say, idea of truth that says, oh, this is the truth, right? And I think that's very dangerous, right? I think that opens up, like a whole, that brings us back to square one in a sense, and doesn't, allow us to rethink some of the assumptions and the very problematic assumptions that, underpin some of those ideas, right? So that's why I guess I've been trying with, many others to think about different ideas and conceptions of truth that might, perhaps be better suited to intervene within the current context in which we live. Maybe one last thing about this question of, let's say, selective visibility. because that has also been a kind of, key component in our work. And, as soon as we have started to work on, migration across the Mediterranean, so, the sea has been historically somehow a rather kind of opaque state, right? Where only, kind of militaries, navies, and certain specific populations have had access to, right? But not, maybe a kind of wider, more general kind of public, right? Although, of course, there is, a lot of, let's say, indigenous peoples and other people who have a very strong, relation to the sea, right? But let's say in the kind of more idea of a public discourse, this hasn't been very present. And I think the ways in which migration at sea is often represented is in very kind of dichotomic terms, right? So on the one hand, you have migrants that we are told, want to travel undetected, right? And go, clandestinely in the kind of etymological sense. And on the other, you have, border controllers who want to, shed light and make visible the patterns of migration. But, as soon as we started to look a bit more closely to what was happening in the Mediterranean, we immediately realized that it was a very kind of simplistic, kind of account, right? Because on the one hand, you have sometimes migrants that do all they can to be noticed, to call for rescue, to be, to be seen and to be made visible, right? And also do all they can to try to make visible the violence that instead, states, commits in the act of policing borders, right? So this idea, I think, needs to be really troubled, and we cannot think about visibility and invisibility as these two kind of separate domain, but rather think about this, how these two are kind of connected or need to be connected and reconnected in different ways.
Thank you for that very much. Should I
yeah, so
yeah.
I maybe just for thank you everyone. I mean, I want to continue this, but I just want to remind everyone in the audience, if you have a question, you can just raise your hand. You can chime in on chat. The floor is open. We would love to kind of bring in your thoughts. Maybe while you're all formulating that, I just wanted to add here, I'm just adding myself in. So, Lorenzo, I kind of, to pick up on what you were just saying, I wrote down the words when you were talking about post-truth of this kind of thinking about, really you framed it as a deluge. We're drowning in more images, videos, etc., right? And so this process is one of mucking, or it's a sludge. It's something that's thick, and this kind of collectivity that is needed, like an individual cannot do that. And it was just something that I think was really important. And the one thing I just wanted to frame here, again, not as like someone who's interested in digital methods in my own research, you all are like experts when I think about this, but really the question here also is about open data, right? And for everybody in the audience, open data, as I understand it, and please chime in, is, kind of made up of kind of the geospatial satellite imagery, which has come in various parts here, expanding technology through phones, but phones that have cameras, and those phones are then connected. Digital social networking, however you can, however people are able to kind of network and connect. And then just this idea of public data, of databases, of depositories, of things that are then kind of publicly available. And so again, everybody, the floor is open, but what I might just add is how you all see open data changing, or what direction are we going in terms of, if the kind of provocation here was this sludge, quick sound, post-truth, which is actually all of this information that is surrounding us. Where are we headed in terms of this deluge of open data? Jillian, and you're welcome to answer too.
Do any of you want to? I mean, I can, but I'd rather turn the floor to you if you'd like.
Please, yeah, Jillian.
Sure. I mean, I think that part of the difficulty of it from my perspective, obviously, a lot of the work that I do is looking, these days anyway, is looking at the ways in which tech companies control a lot of our data. And so the data that we think of as open a lot of times is not open. It's hosted on closed servers. It's subject to geopolitical whims. And so I think there's two complexities here. One, of course, is the deluge of it, the fact that we have so much of this to sort through. And I think that the three of you are by far the experts on this, and I am not. So I do want to turn that back to the panelists, but I will just say that, I think the other complexity here is the control over the data. And so, as we've seen with Syrian Archive, the fact that there is, that YouTube itself, that Google itself is contributing to selective memory by choosing to remove certain videos that don't fit their idea of what's acceptable. And so, I don't know if everyone's familiar, so I'll just quickly explain. Hadi, please correct me if I'm wrong on anything. But from the perspective that I have on this, it's primarily using US definitions of who is a terrorist and applying those rules generally using automation. And so, in essence, you could have a video of a protest that has like a Hezbollah flag in the background, and that very the essence of that flag being there is enough to trigger automation. And so I see it, as both the deluge of this, but also the selection of it, and the roles that corporations and their connections to governments play. And that's, I think, the more troubling part of it for me. But I really would rather turn it to the three of you.
Maybe I can, start saying something, just, like continuing maybe what you were saying, Gillian. I think it's very important to somehow kind of, in the same way as I was referring to, let's say, the need to look at what's happening in between, visibility and invisibility. I also think there is a need to kind of complexify and develop our own kind of language and vocabulary, to think about data, besides the kind of open versus, well, I don't know what would be the opposite of that, let's say proprietary or kind of, private or closed, let's say, data, right? In the sense that I do think that a lot of, these, it's a lot more subtle, right? So there are a lot of, let's say, variations, which we need to be very attentive to, right? So like the satellite image that I was showing, yes, it's open in the sense that everyone can access it, but in exchange for a financial transaction, right? So it's kind of commercially available. You need to pay for that, right? And the satellites that take that image, some are like publicly owned, some are privately owned, some belong to the military, some, so there is kind of like a huge variety there of like different kind of statuses that I think we need to be attentive to. And I think, the kind of work that needs to happen, in a sense, it is, this work of kind of that I was trying to refer to earlier of, let's say, painstaking kind of verification, which means, trying to connect some of these dots, right? We cannot, none of these, type like kind of data or information exists, in a vacuum, right? It's always kind of, and the task is really that of connecting it with other data points and other, sources of information, right? And I think, the Syrian Archive has been doing that, like, very beautifully and importantly, we at Forensic Oceanography and Architecture have also tried to do something like that. I also know, for instance, in some of the work that has been done on missing people, on missing migrants specifically, right? Like how there is especially some interesting work being done by the ICRC, somebody called Jose Pablo Barjar, who is, has been trying to find, starting from a shipwreck, right, from a sunken boat, right, and knowing maybe the identity of like one or two of the people who were on board, trying to remap, let's say, the networks that brought people together, right, and so in a sense, it's a very similar work that, to the one that we do with kind of images and videos, but they are, you're dealing, let's say, somehow with biographic experiences with people and trying to, see the connection that links us as individuals, right? So that seems to me, one of the possible way of kind of engaging and, not being scared by this deluge, but rather, really diving even deeper into that, but as a more kind of collective endeavor, right, of like connecting points and not considering things isolated from each other.
Yeah, I agree with Lorenzo about diving deeper. I mean, I think this makes a lot of sense, and I mean, right now we're trying to think about this because it is actually a huge problem when it comes to, as you mentioned, Jared, drowning more in images and videos. And the scale is quite high when it comes to Syria. Syria was like the first conflict where we see this amount of images, but it's the same in different other countries too. We've been working in Yemen, Sudan. There's a lot going on right now in Myanmar, Ethiopia, China, and so on. So then I think like I mean, what becomes in, okay, open data is there and it's gonna still be there. It's gonna still be a lot. The scale is going to go higher. Depending on the control that Gillian mentioned of social media platforms, we don't know how this is going to be developed. They might, people might be able to upload things on social media platforms anymore. But there will be some sort like of open data. But the key is definitely what you mentioned, Lorenzo, is about connecting the dots, doing verification, doing analysis, and adding value to the open data. So at least in the human, I mean, rights community, we are able to use it for different purposes. And we definitely need solutions there. I don't know where this field is going, but I know that definitely there needs to be some work done when it comes to how to sort out things in a faster way than now. We are still working manually. We're still sorting things out and organizing things out manually. How can we actually do things more automated when it comes to discovery, when it comes to at least organizing and cataloging? And that's going to help us so much to turn open data scattered into organized added value data, which is, I really hope that this will be the way moving forward. Yeah, just few thoughts.
I also really just noted this comment that came in. I really appreciate this as well. Like the notion of open data also needs to incorporate the temporal dimension, and thinking about the more ephemeral content. I mean, I remember particularly like with the protests in Lebanon last year, which I mean, I guess were probably the first I'd watched live in quite some time. A lot of the content flowing through being very ephemeral, the Snapchat stories or Instagram stories, things like that. And so, I mean, I know that a lot of that is captured as well, and a lot of it is saved and archived. But I think, the complexity of, everything that we're talking about, but the corporate control combined with the ephemerality of content and the issues inherent to archival really strikes me as like the next big problem to be solved, I guess.
I'm just going to put in a quick plug. The next Digital FORAYS event, which is kind of the continuation of this digital ways of knowing, are the afterlives of social media. And we'll see how much of that kind of stream ephemerality we get into. But I think I totally agree with you, Gillian, that being kind of this other nexus of potential, but also peril of how it does disappear.
And if I may, I mean, I think that there is, I know this is more my work than what we're talking about today, but I see a connection here between the work that you're all doing and the work that I do. And Hadi, I mean, obviously like has worked on a lot of this as well. But the need for a user-centered movement when it comes to the control of technology really does, I mean, it really does strike me as being hand in hand with the work that all of you are doing in terms of kind of taking back the ownership, the visibility, the collective of all of, so I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I hope that there is, more collaboration in this stuff in the future.
I would just like to jump in regarding open source data, and especially when we used to collect information regarding missing persons in Syria. It's not open source, of course, because people are already risking their lives by just reporting. Because in the end, if any information, becomes available, the person who is detained or kidnapped might risk his or her life. And you notice that most of the organizations that are documenting the missing and the enforcedly disappear, they give numbers, but they don't give names anymore. And all this information is not publicly available. However, it could be later publicly available, for instance, with the ICMP, what they've done with their work in Srebrenica after identifying the bodies in the mass graves or the whereabouts of the missing individuals. That information became public later on after the tribunal. So in the end, it also needs to be strategic in a way that it helps the families and not, jeopardize their safety. But regarding open source, I think it fits in my personal work, which is trying to do retrospective archiving, whereby we're looking at the oral histories and the narratives of people from the Lebanese civil war and trying to also corroborate that with news and pieces of information that happened in the past. Also, we're trying to look at documentaries, at films, and the like. And that's usually open source because people are more than happy to be sharing their narratives and their stories. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. And I think that that's such an important reminder just of where the intersection of security and safety and the importance of a lot of this being open source lies. So thank you very much for that. Jared, should I turn it back over?
Yeah, you can turn it back over again. Anyone in, okay, I see another question from Fatima. Hadi, could you elaborate on the circumstances that led your team to opening sister archives covering Yemen and Sudan?
Yes, absolutely. So we've been working on the Syria situation since 2014. We've been learning a lot from that work, working with people who are, as you said, Samira, risking their life to document human rights violations. We've been working on collecting, archiving their materials, verifying it in the best way possible, and analyzing it to make sure that we are the intermediary between them and any human rights organization wants to report, news media wants to report, prosecutor wants to build a legal case or prosecute. Unfortunately, I mean, as you know, because of the unpolitical will with the Syria situation, it's very difficult for us. The political situation really blocked a lot of circumstances when it comes to justice in Syria. So part of what we also wanted to do because of this unpolitical will is to be able to at least make sure that we are able to share knowledge with other colleagues and that they are doing the same thing. So what happened is that we've been reached out from colleagues from Yemen, Sudan, in order to create archives for them, train them on how to do investigations and verification, set up infrastructure for them in order to do so, or workflows in order just not to start from scratch. So this is how it was started in Yemen. The same thing in Sudan after the protests that have started in late 2018. We've been getting also different kind of requests from different groups, individuals, and organizations, because the challenges are being faced from many different groups when it comes to human rights issue and this kind of type of content, media, published mostly on social media platforms. Same challenges has been facing in terms of the risk of loss of these materials, the verification issues, connecting the dots, analyzing, investigating, having the skills and tools to do so. So this is how this was happened, and yeah, we were lucky to be able to realize Yemen and Sudan, and we're planning to be able to at least train other groups, set up infrastructure for them if they want to use it themselves, and so on.
I have a question, if I may. I have a question to everybody in the panel, and it's timely because Syria, for instance, is going to be reviewed for its Universal Periodic Review next January. And as you know, all civil society organizations are preparing their stakeholder reports and the like. How do you think, or when do you think we would be able to use material that it's not just textual, more like visual in such reports? Because up till now, it's still kind of traditional where you have to write a report of 5 to 7 pages where you have to just give some numbers, some statistics, and some information. And most of the investigations go into, for example, commission of inquiry. How come we cannot use it also in such mechanisms? And what do you think we can do about that?
I can start maybe with some ideas. I'd say it's a great question and a very difficult one, and I don't have like a specific answer to that. But I mean, all I can say is that I think you're putting your finger on a very important question, and something that I also feel like it's very important to acknowledge to start with, but also to address in some way, right? And I guess, I don't know, I mean, I really I have no idea, why this is the situation right now. All I can think is, maybe it has to do more with the kind of, the human rights word being, anchored to a certain legal context where, the written word, as a certain status that, kind of precedes other kinds of like engagement and representations with reality. But I do think, that has been a very limiting factor, right? It's not that I feel that, if reports were more visual or using more kind of, the situation, let's say worldwide, would have changed like dramatically, right? But I do think there could be a lot of scope there to think through these things in a more, in a better way, I guess, one might say. It's something that with my own students, I do a studio course in forensic architecture, and next week we have one workshop that I do every year about kind of creating a kind of counter genealogy of the human rights report, in a sense, where I ask first the students to pick up a human rights report by one of the kind of the well-known organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, or whatever, and then we kind of read it, analyze it, and then the following week they come with a series of documents that come from a much kind of wilder tradition of like visualizations of and engagement with forms of injustice, oppression, etc. That goes, I don't know, from Engels, the condition of the working class in England, to Du Bois, kind of infographics about the condition of the Negro in America, as he called it for the Paris colonial exhibition of the early century, last century, to a lot of kind of other examples that would not kind of fit within the kind of classic history and genealogy of the human rights report, but that precisely tries to kind of push them to think beyond that imagination and that tradition, right? So in a sense, I feel it's a work that needs to be done and happen, and kind of somehow a new generation of people like doing that kind of work needs to come. But yeah, maybe it's not like that will certainly take time, and of course will bring its own problems as well, right? I don't think it's it's a solution in itself, but it's maybe like a different way of doing something, and hopefully one that opens up other possibilities.
If I can maybe just add to that, and maybe this is the segue to the close, is being situated in the university, this whole series of digital forays is actually from a different standpoint trying to do exactly that, right? Where what we say we're doing in the university versus what we're encouraging students to do you know, this isn't just with like graphs and visualizations, but what is data anymore? What is information? What are you doing with it? What is the relationship between image and text? How do you integrate that in other ways, right? How do you not just write a thesis that is just the words on the paper? And students are really trying to push against that. And Samira, what I hear, what resonates with me from a different place is, right, we're like those same currents, we're trying to push against the standards and the norms to kind of better account for the messiness that we live in. That I think really is this epistemological landscape that we're kind of intervening on here of, okay, things are changing really quick. How do we sort this out? And so if anybody has anything else you want to add, this is like the auctioneer's last chance for the audience. If you have a question to slide in here before we wrap up.
I would say power to the people.
Okay, and maybe that's a wonderful place to leave it. So thank you, all four of you, for being here, for being so open, for your expertise and experience.